So Charlie was at Bird, and before that at Scoot, the first ones to do electric moped sharing with a smartphone. I worked at Lime. And I think there's no denying the fact that there's a bad rap because of the bankruptcies you mentioned. There's Bird, there was Super Pedestrian, there's also Van Moof, an e-bike, direct-to-consumer e-bike company out of Holland that also went bankrupt. Sharing is a very, very hard business model. And so is true even for City Bikes, who's doing 100 million plus in revenue, but again, struggling as a strong, solid business model. Called out as well, what it sometimes masks is the demand, right? Lime just announced 500 million trips, right? In a year and a half when I was there, they already had 100 million trips. And I think this is where we are trying to be different, where continue on the same demand that we're seeing and continue to encourage folks to embrace this new lifestyle or new way of moving in cities and embrace that as a long-term behavioral change while addressing some of these key business model issues that these companies that I mentioned have faced.
Welcome back to the Clean Techies podcast, where we interview the top climate founders and VCs to get their best advice for you. In this episode, I chat with Chinmay Malaviya and Charlie Depman, CEO and CTO of Ridepanda, expanding access and usage of e-bikes, e-scooters, and micromobility through employer-sponsored subscriptions. Chinmay and Charlie bring a lot of startup and industry experience and were able to speak not only about their growth, but also the technical designs that helped them be successful in micromobility, which was a real treat. We talk about how Ridepanda offers benefits to employers to subsidize employee transportation, why micromobility faces such a bad rep, how they balance optionality and user choice while still focusing on scaling their inventory, analyzing historical data to project future growth and consider seasonality, accepting that seasonality and overcoming challenges in the industry, how they design their software for micromobility, and much more. As always, thanks so much for listening. Consider subscribing and enjoy the episode. All right, Charlie and Chinmay, welcome to the show. How are you?
Doing well, Samuel. Thanks for this opportunity to talk to us, and yeah, super excited.
Yeah, thanks, Somo. Thanks for having us on Clean Techies.
Yeah, we're super excited. I know Silas would have loved to have made this episode because I feel like micromobility has a special place in our hearts. And honestly, I think this is a super relevant topic, especially for right now. There's a lot of policy legislation that we're tracking that are coming out about this topic. So super excited to have you on. Really quick, why don't we dive into it? What do you do and who are you?
Yeah, so we are Ridepanda. What we offer is a sustainable mobility benefits platform. The way we help employers with our platform is to offer a curated selection of bikes and scooters, electric, not electric, at subscription pricing that employers can subsidize for their employees as part of their push to get people back to work, to give them a sustainable way to do so, to encourage an active mode of transportation, to exercise and decompress after work, as well as to reduce some sort of costs, it's around expensive parking or expensive shuttles and vans and all that they have to run, and finally meet also certain city and local mandates around reducing single occupancy car trips.
So the space you operate in is called micromobility, and micromobility is a super, super crucial aspect of decarbonization, transportation as a whole, but it doesn't have the best rep. And I think one great example of this is what the difficulty of Bird going bankrupt has done to the industry. When we were talking about this leading up to the episode, I was able to learn from you that the demand is actually rising. So why do you think this news is masking the demand, and where does this bad rep come from?
No, great question, Samuel. I think me and Charlie across, we actually worked at these companies. So Charlie was at Bird, and before that at Scoot, the first ones to do electric moped sharing with a smartphone. I worked at Lime. And I think there's no denying the fact that there's a bad rap because of the bankruptcies you mentioned. There's Bird, there was Super Pedestrian, there's also Van Moof, an e-bike, direct-to-consumer e-bike company out of Holland that also went bankrupt. And I think these are sharing is a very, very hard business model, right? It is how do you successfully build a business where your vehicles free floating on the streets, you have expensive costs around charging them, around rebalancing them, around repairing them, fighting against vandalism, theft that is very much rampant, and all of those things put a lot of stress on these startup, like the sharing businesses. And so is true even for City Bikes, who's doing 100 million plus in revenue, but again struggling as a strong, solid business model. If you look at Van Moof, I think again they did an amazing job in terms of really coming up this beautiful exciting electric bike form factor that really got especially the non-bikers to look at e-bikes in a different angle. That said, they really struggle around having 90% property parts, around a supply chain of parts, and making sure that they can actually ensure a great experience once someone gets a bike, which is where they really struggle with. What, as you called out as well, what it sometimes masks is the demand, right? Lime just announced 500 million trips, right? In a year and a half when I was there, they already had 100 million trips. When Move at its peaks were doing anywhere from 100 to 200 million in revenue, right? So that e-bike, e-scooter boom has continued over the past couple of years, thanks to the fact of just more awareness on sustainability, but also lower bike, battery prices and so on and so forth. That has led to the revolution. And I think, and also some, business model challenges that these sort of companies have had. And I think this is where we are trying to be different, where continue on the same demand that we're seeing and continue to encourage folks to embrace this new lifestyle or new way of moving in cities and embrace that as a long-term behavioral change while addressing some of these key business model issues that these companies that I mentioned have faced.
So to make sure I understand correctly, the sharing of the business model itself is the most difficult part of the business, which is really getting in the way of people paying attention to the growth of the micromobility industry. And what that's doing is it's distracting people from recognizing that, hey, that there's sustainable revenue here. Am I understanding that correctly?
You're spot on, right? I think this is where like the business model is being hard, and then there's some other secondary challenges attached to some of the sharing models, right? So it's around choice. They are one size fits all, right? So whereas if you just Google e-bike or you go to our website, there's so many different types and kinds of form factors for different body types, with different, different heights, different storage requirements. If you how long do you commute? Do you have hills? Is it flat? Do you want more exercise? Do you want less exercise? All of those things. Are you doing multimodal trips? Are you just going 2 miles back and forth? Affordability. Lime for a single trip now is $10 in San Francisco, right? For like a 10-15 minute trip, which again is not necessarily affordable if you're a regular user. And then finally, convenience and reliability, right? Like if you wake up, you may find a line next to you, may not find a line. There are, of course, government caps, which rightfully so, to make sure that they're not all over the streets. But again, that limit how reliable these modes can be. So I think it's a mix of business model. It's a mix of some of the challenges that have led to them not being very very successful. Again, they got a lot of demand, a lot of attention, a lot of interest, and I think our job is like, okay, how do we take that interest and convert it into long-term behavior change?
Amazing. I mean, I'm inspired. And I think one of the coolest things that you guys do is you have a new business model approach. So before we wow the audience with that, I'd love to hear about your own individual roles within the company that you're building. What do you guys do?
Yeah, so I'm the co-founder and CTO. So I basically run the product and tech that we've been building, and I think we're really proud of the platform that we've built so far for helping get people on e-bikes through subscriptions, partnering with employers, and that spans everywhere from procuring all of those e-bikes and scooters and pedal bikes from suppliers, ingesting them into our system, presenting them to users, helping them pick the right vehicles, all the way through to reporting to our various partners, data on how many car trips are being avoided, CO2 saved, etc., and then all the maintenance and services that go into the service that we provide to the employers and the employees.
Yeah, and I'm Chinmay. I'm the other panda here, and I'm the co-founder and CEO. I focus a lot more on the business topics, so looking at sales, marketing, operations, finance. But again, me and Charlie are very much we started as two, so I think we have of course multiplied over time. But I think really grateful for the amazing co-founder partnership I've had throughout various different topics, from how to hire, fundraise, sales, marketing. We have gone through pivots as well. We'll maybe touch on that. So really, yeah, that's it's all it's a joint partnership that we have over time multiplied while keeping a good culture.
And so let's dive into how you're really switching the topic in terms of the business model innovation, trying to make it a more positive note. And honestly, you're doing an approach that I really respect. I first came about sort of the employer business model and the opportunity there through other industries. Insurance is actually one. Some startups trying to disrupt the insurance space. So I think I'm super excited to hear about this in depth. Please, what is Ridepanda doing that's really about to, switch the way that people look at this industry?
Yeah, I think we're addressing a lot of the issues that Chinmay mentioned about the sharing companies. So, number one being choice. I think a lot of the sharing companies, as Chinmay mentioned, have sort of a one size fits all vehicle. And we know from our experience that that doesn't serve all of the different use cases that people have. It also doesn't serve all the different body types that are out there. So we really pride ourselves on the selection of vehicles that we have from high quality vendors like Specialized and Giant and Segway and Brompton, etc., so that people, when they want to subscribe to us, have that option of picking the right vehicle for themselves. We also offer swapping, so we really want to make sure that that is the right vehicle for the user. Onto affordability, I think we partner with employers who help subsidize the cost of these vehicles, and a really nice e-bike, goes anywhere from $2,500 up. So that sort of financial engineering around making that affordable to the rider is really important. And then you don't subscribe to a shared vehicle, you're subscribing to your personal vehicle. So you take that home with you. It's there when you need it. And you can, we see with our customers, they're not only using it for commuting, they're using it for a whole host of other outings, like going to see a friend, grocery shopping, even taking kids to school. So, we really see good success there, as opposed to the sharing companies. And yeah, it's been amazing to see all the metrics coming out of our user base around usage, and how many car trips are avoided. And we're seeing about 6+ car trips avoided per week per person, which I think we take a lot of pride in.
Wow. And I would love that about micromobility. I spent some time within General SaaS looking at a lot of different, local transit options and alternatives, basically trying to take Uber and make it hyper localized where that's possible. And it's amazing to see the kind of metrics and data you can pull from it, the different types of things you can optimize. One thing I'd love to talk about, kind of going back a little bit, is the financial model. And so the employer business model, I kind of shouted out before you even got into it, but where did the inspiration for the employer business model come from? And why do you believe it's a winning model?
Great questions, Samuel. I think initially when we started, we were not doing this, right? We were like, hey, we were just fresh out of our experience at Alignment Bird, and we were like, hey, there's some challenges as we talked about, but there's still demand here. How do we continue that, like, and support this demand with some high quality vehicles, with support, servicing, all of that. So I think that's where we initially sort of started. We did some work with government electric bike rebates, and in the US now, 100 plus cities and states have a program. We did some work with delivery companies. And really, I think we landed on an opportunity by learning that an employer was already offering it, right? So if you look at transportation, is not a new spend for companies, right? It's a spend that companies have been doing for decades and decades. It has traditionally been more focused on parking and transit, and van pools and shuttles. What has changed is, and I think this is where employers were already reacting to, is that, hey, now e-bikes and e-scooters are a thing now, right? And now as we look at the new post-COVID hybrid world where it's flexible way to get to work, people are asking for more agency. It doesn't make sense to run shuttles at high frequency, but actually give something that's needed the hour for their employees. They of course are trying to be more sustainable, of course trying to encourage wellness and active mode of transportation. So that was already happening. And I think our very first customer is Amazon, right? So we learned that Amazon was offering it. There's a beautiful press release about it. And then it sparked a lot of ideas on our head. And we just really approached them and say, with our own sort of startup hustle, for lack of a better word, in town, figuring out who at Amazon is doing it, and can we talk to them and understand what are they doing, how are they doing it, and how are they feeling about it. And I think that our conversations there is what really struck gold for us here in this sort of opportunity where we learned they're working just with a single bike manufacturer, that is again not offering choice. It's out of stock every 2 months. Service levels are poor, and that is not giving the right data and metrics for an employer to promote and celebrate success. And we realized that as a tech company first, having learned around shipping products all over the US in our previous business model, how hard that is and how much service is important, we realized that, okay, we could build a solution which is tech first, but also service first, that can help an employer like Amazon to offer what they were doing and meet their goals broadly. So we went all in with them, and as you can imagine, it's not the easiest customer to deal with when it's your very first customer as a startup. But I think we see them as a very, very happy customer. I think we've grown 100% year over year. We have thousands of of their employees already using us. But really, I think where we saw like really what validated in the startup world product market fit is that other employers were equally, if not more, excited about the same thing that Amazon was doing. Right. So now we work with various different tech employers, but we also work with city governments. We work with law firms. We're launching with a hospital. We're looking at even hotels are reaching out for their employees. We had a big automotive company reached out to us as well. So I think it's exciting to see that it is top of mind. It was already an existing spend. It's the new world we are in where bikes and scooters are getting more embraced. Folks are already aware and they're looking for a solution. And I think this is where sort of we come in with our experience, having done the limes and birds, having done a different business model to come and know what will work best and then double down on this.
And having Amazon as a first customer is not a bad find at all. That's incredible. And one of the things that stood out to me, especially about that, is you went through this initial business model and you did some tweaking within it. When we were talking about earlier, you mentioned Gym Pass as a historical lesson. And I think one of the things that's so cool about climate tech is the ability for business models applied in other industries to facilitate some of the difficulty, finance some of the difficulty that we see. It's not easy for all climate tech innovations to be financed because of the difficult challenges. And so one of the things is making it approachable for the consumer to be able to buy in very creative ways. So it's a very long way of giving a preamble that I would love to know for you, how was Gym Pass an example and what did you learn from it?
I think we learned so much, and I think we're so very grateful to all of these different teammates that we reached out, called on LinkedIn, who talked to us, from sales teams in Brazil to folks in Europe to even folks in the US, to actually explain how the model works, what is success been, what are the challenges been, and I think we are on a very similar sort of tailwind here. So Gympass started close to 7-8 years ago. First market being Brazil. They were initially also like us, a direct to consumer sort of play where they were really trying to be class pass. What struck gold for them is and their very first partner was PwC, and they wanted to buy all these passes for all their employees, their fitness passes. That was what made them realize the power of B2B and how you can really reach to scale right away in terms of in terms of what success means, and getting more people, in their case, exercising and being fit mentally, physically, and so on and so forth. And what they did, I think this is what we are also doing, using the first employer as their anchor to follow through and grow with them in different cities and countries. So they went with PwC to Europe and then went to PwC to US. And similarly, I think we are using some of our anchor clients. And when we launched Seattle, we are with Amazon, and then we look at them and to go to different cities as well. So I think we learned a ton around what operations and expansion means for us. We learned a ton about benefits as a business, right? So it's a B2B2C model. We are working with employers, understanding what their goals are and meeting their needs with the solution, making it very seamless and friction free for both the employer and the employee. The other model where how do you like the adoption is very, very important. How do you make sure that they're aware of this benefit? How can you make it so simple and easy for them to embrace this? Choices, that's why to our point, is very, very important. Half of our riders, and this was something that we find very meaningful, are actually new to biking. They are using, almost coming into us because of this financial subsidy that they see as a way to enter the e-bike world. I think those are things that we had to sort of do, and then I think it's also being continuously top of mind. How do you use the power of referrals? How do you use the power of initial customers as a word of mouth to other people? How do you use the power of ERG groups? Each big and small companies have like resource groups around sustainability and biking. How do you work with them closely? How do you use the power of leadership? Like if a senior person at a company says, "I am doing this," that percolates to some of the junior folks to also embrace that as a lifestyle. So I think a lot of these things Gympass did to be very successful over time, and also they also had a hard fight in terms of encouraging people to think of fitness seriously. Now, if you think every employer thinks of fitness as mental health, fertility benefits, transportation, all of these are very well attuned to. But I think back in the day, they had to really do a lot of education. So I think we learned a ton, and I think from their model, and they've been tremendously successful in getting lots of employers on board. So it just gave us a pathway as we model our success. If we could be like what Gympass did, we could be a sizable, company, have achieve all kinds of venture returns, but also the impact we want to do.
Right.
Yeah.
I want to break this down because I feel like one of the main tropes that you could fall into is look at this company that's in my same industry and I'm going to copy them. But I think what you've done here is you found a company with a similar business model, right? Starting with D2C. They had a very similar anchor client to your anchor client situation, a large corporate that you could expand with. And the last thing is they face a similar major problem. So in this case, it was an industry-wide perception problem. I mean, these are three different parallels that you could relate to them over. And so it's not as simple as a company that's in my industry that I can compete with or compare to. They aligned on a number of different things. So their lessons were very applicable. Am I understanding that correctly?
100%. You very, very well put. Yeah.
Okay, amazing. And I want to come back to the topic of choice because it's been mentioned a few times. So, one of the most interesting things, like you said, if you go to the website, I'm a consumer, I want different options. You, as an entrepreneur, have to help me make that decision. And you also have to balance that against your own financial decision making. So, how do you strike the balance between scalability of bike production and bike parity? How do you generally tell if you've diversified too much or if you should offer more options?
Yeah, great question, Soma. So we've actually been doing a lot of data analytics on our set of vehicles that we offer, anywhere from how people are browsing to look at the vehicles to, the actual numbers that we order per vehicle type. So, we are a vendor agnostic platform, so we could have as many vehicles as is possible. But right, there's some fatigue that comes if there are too many options. And then there's also operational overhead if there are too many options as well. So that becomes a burden on, the ordering process, how much leverage we can have in terms of doing bulk ordering, and then the repair process too. Like if we have, dozens and dozens of different manufacturers, we're going to have parts to supply all of those repairs that need to happen. So yes, we've been doing a bunch of work recently to sort of modulate the number of vehicles that we have on our platform, and that will continue to fluctuate. Like we'll expand and then we'll contract a little bit and we'll expand again, and we're constantly looking for new vehicle types. In fact, Chinmay and I and two of our colleagues just went to the Philly Bike Expo this past weekend to look at new vehicles that we might want to integrate onto the platform. So this is something we're continuing to evolve.
Hey guys, we need your help with something. In order to better understand what you like most about the show, what you dislike, and how we can help you, please take 7 minutes to fill out our listener survey if you haven't already. It only takes about 7 minutes, but it will drastically improve our ability to give you the best content that you're looking for. Thanks for your help. Hey guys, sorry for the interruption. I just need a few seconds because Soma and I have two quick favors to ask. Putting out the show each week takes about 15 to 20 hours between us, so it's a lot of effort, and it would mean the world to us if you would leave a review and mention your favorite episode. Secondly, if you're not already, go over and subscribe to the podcast on Substack. The content is free, but if you like hanging out with us each week, maybe we're even the kind of guys you'd like to buy a coffee for on occasion, consider becoming a paid subscriber. For the cost of one lavender latte a month, you can help us immensely. Thank you for tuning in consistently and helping us to share our guests' stories. Now back to the show.
Yeah, and I think the formula that you'll come up with will eventually, post the exit of Ridepanda, will make you sort of the key advisor relationship, right? Board advisor relationship. I can only imagine that going through that experientially would teach you so much. You talked about essentially breaking down the cost analysis and the behavior change of consumers using your own products over time. One thing I want to talk about is the other side of it, which is anticipating demand. So you're talking about, for example, this expo that you can go to see the future of innovation. But how do you go about thinking about anticipating the demand for your different choices? And what have you learned about that over time?
We look historically at the performance of, how many orders are coming in, year over year. And we're also projecting out, based on new employers that we have. So based on their sort of population that we're addressing, we can sort of forecast how many orders we're going to expect. And for us, there is a little bit of seasonality, most of the micromobility industry. So, there's always a bit of a, winter sort of plateau, and then it picks up again in the spring and the summer. And, we're expecting a really big spring and summer this year, given, the employers that we've added and sort of the flywheel effect that Chinmay was alluding to around word of mouth at these employers. So yeah, I think we're looking at some exciting traction in the next few months and into the rest of the year.
Very cool. And I think seasonality is actually a very, very, for certain industries, it's everything, right? Especially for some, it's the buying cycle. So if you look at ag tech and ed tech, for example, the seasonality means the only time that a company can do well. Here you're talking maybe more about fluctuating demand, fluctuating interest. So it's a topic that I think you really have to be a founder. And what we've seen on this podcast is the people who are in it, and the people who aren't in it don't really get it. So I'm curious, how have you gotten better at thinking about seasonality, and even then maybe convincing big clients or basically the fundraising targets about how you're going to overcome the challenges of
I
seasonality?
think I think there's someone I think goes back to just accepting, as Charlie was saying, that this is part of the business. This is not something that we are running away from, or we are too almost too confident to a level where we just think that we can go against it and get some miracles happening for us. When you look at biking or micromobility, people think more about it in the summer than in winter, right? That's just so. When you look at new signups, as you know, we are modeling in that the interest and demand would very much be in spring and summer, and we have seen it over our multiple summers and winter we've been through. That is true, really true for the case. What we're excited though to see is that folks have continued subscribing with us during the winters as well. So it's not like it's the habit formation that we're really going after. What would really be bad for us would be like, hey, people only ride for the 3 months of summer, and then they're like, I don't want to do it, or I don't understand it, or how do I do it? And I think it's all about helping them in their journey, right? When as it gets cold, maybe people do less trips, but it's understanding that's not necessarily about the weather; it's about clothing, right? It's about having the right gear to be more prepared for, right? When you look at rains, that now you have all kinds of ponchos or you have like fenders for your bikes. All of these things, the support we can do to make sure that folks who are embracing us, and it could be during the summertime when we are top of mind, to actually be able to have that as a year-long vehicle when they want to use it. So I think that's where we put a lot of emphasis and focus on is the behavior change once you sign up for something, right? And helping you throughout, while knowing the seasonality will affect when people are thinking about us more versus less.
So it's really, and I think this phrase, I'm definitely going to use it in the future, accepting what is part of the business. That's something that in climate, especially, mobility is part of it, built environment, which I'm a huge fan of. Sometimes you just have to accept that there are certain relationships and dynamics within the industry and not sell the company as if it's, the old generation of B2B SaaS, software VC model that it's going to sell itself. There are some realisms. Do you think that's something that you had to accept over time, or is it something that you came into this company anticipating?
I think we having both of us had these experiences in micromobility before, we sort of knew going in. I think what we were pleasantly surprised about is that we are able to continue the relationship with our employees, our riders, throughout the colder months as well. uh, there's not any sort of significant drop off at all, which is very meaningful and exciting for us to see that, hey, our work to actually convert them into long term riders across seasons is moving toward in the right direction. We don't want this to be a people's joyride. We don't just want them to be a people's joyride for summer. That's great. That's awesome. But what we want is that behavioral change. We want them to not think about any other way to get to, with especially the micromobility trips, but look at their bike that they got from us, and making, and if they want to swap to a different one, they want to get any service, they have any challenges, call us, talk to us. We are there to help them.
You made the transition very easy to me. I think one of the most remarkable things when I was doing the research for this episode is your backgrounds and how that factors into, I'm sure, how you run the company and your success. So, in a very bad transition, I'd love to jump into it. Starting with Chinmay, one of the coolest things is potentially the continuation of Panda throughout your journey. And so, for the audience, you founded a company or part of the founding team of a company called Food Panda, and you held a number of roles there. So I wanted to ask you what you learned from those roles that helped you, especially as a first-time founder, and also giving the audience a bit of clarity as to what was Food Panda.
Yeah, thank you. I think pandas seems to be core to my life, so I'm very happy for that. So Food Panda is now one of the leading online food delivery platforms in Asia. Started in 2012 in Singapore. Now it's it's acquired. Delivery Hero acquired them in 2016. Delivery is public, so they're still crushing it. So if you and any of your listeners happen to be in Singapore or Hong Kong or Taiwan, I'll highly encourage to use the Food Panda service. Now, to your question, I think it was a fantastic experience for me. It was really post my undergrad, the very first sort of professional experience I had. And I learned so much, right? And some of the ethos of being an entrepreneur really connected with me, and they were as follows: the proximity to impact, the ability to wake up and prioritize your time and your efforts to what matters most today. The intellectual stimulation you get from working out various different problems for the company is less about what I want to do today, it's more about what are the business needs. It could be sales, it could be something in marketing, it could be something in operations. And how do you able to intellectually sort of switch from one to another and be able to do that. I learned a ton about managing, leading teams. We had teams from sort of the white collar, collar workers, college educated folks, from to some of the hard work that our customer service and delivery folks were doing. And how do I make sure that it's still a one single united team to be able to do that 7 days a week when you look at food delivery as a concept. And also, I think what was also exciting to see, which we see at Ridepanda too, is the technological evolution. 2012 was days in Asia where it was all about desktop. Desktop went to 2013, 14. We were trying to convince people to pay online because food delivery used to be cash on delivery. Then 2014 came the smartphones, and suddenly we were going as an app first company. And then 2014, 15, if you know, in same in the US, DoorDash and Uber was coming, and it was all about the gig workers. And I think we saw all of those changes too, and it was super exciting and fruitful to work on those sort of technological changes as they were happening, and then connect to our business. If you look at food deliveries, it has existed during our parents' generation. It was more around done on the phone. We were trying to make it convenient, easy, accessible, uh, empowering choice, and so on and so forth, with the technologies at hand in play, and reacting and adapting to as they were coming in the market. And a lot of these things are also we are sort of doing at Right Panda.
The two things that really stood out to me about what you said, prioritizing what the business needs, and on top of that, what matters to the business. This to me sounds like when you're going through the rigor of running your own company, it's very easy to be distracted by certain things and to think that you know what is right. But a lot of times what we find is founders are not paying attention to the actual business needs. They think that they might be thinking in some sort of long-term projection, but instead they're ignoring some very, very real challenges that are ahead of them. And the second thing was the technological evolution piece. I mean, the pace of innovation, especially within the software enablement access space, is exploding with how many different optimizations and data and algorithms that are available. So being able to keep up and reckon with the pace of innovation as a founder, I'm sure that comes as a huge asset to you running your company. One of the coolest things I think about the work that you do is that Lime is, of course, a very storied company. One of my great mentors at Elemental Accelerator came from Lime as well. I know we talked about that for really quickly. It seems like it was your sort of intentional transition to the space. So how did you get there, and what did you learn from being there?
Great question, Samuel. So I like post Food Panda. As I shared with you, like I loved being an entrepreneur, and that's what I wanted to do. The big question, and I think many of I guess entrepreneurs may have before starting the company, is what company to start, what idea to work on. And I wanted to do something. I wanted more meaning in life. I realized that this is the path for me, like as a professional role for me. But I was like, how do I do that? And I could not figure it out. But I think now things have sort of changed. But back in 2012, 2013, we were this only sort of startup entity in Asia. So I think the allure or enigma was Silicon Valley. Like to be there, be the mecca of entrepreneurship, and that hopefully will inspire me, will push me to think about what my next steps are. And Lime was more of for me initially when I joined, was like my Silicon Valley adventure, right? Lime was, I joined pretty early, and I think I had a sort of like a initial leading strategy and planning, and it was a fascinating exposure to me to like how a Silicon Valley company would be done, and I thought it would inspire me to do what I will do next. But it's my time at Lime that got me super excited about the transportation is the space and the macro around transportation. If you look at the US, transportation is the number one cause of emissions. Half of that comes from passenger cars. 60% of the car trips are in 0 to 5 miles. And micromobility is ripe to disrupt that. Like Lime, as we talked about, did 100 million trips in a year and a half, just announced 500 million trips. E-bikes have been booming. So those things made it very clear. And going back post my Food Panda journey to have a meaningful mission to work on is my experience at Lime is what inspired me that, hey, this is great. There's a real problem here to be solved that could be meaningful for me. It would give me all of the all of the stimulation and excitement that I want from an entrepreneur, and also to be able to build culture from day one, from that I can actually have a much more say, given now that I have a little more experience across both Lime but also previously then doing Food Panda. So yeah.
And Charlie, you had your own experience in the space previous to doing your work at Ridepanda. You worked at Scoot Networks. And maybe it wasn't motivated by the same Silicon Valley dream as Chinmay, but I wanted to know what got you there. And your work, of course, being more on the technical side, I'd love to hear about the nuances in designing software for micromobility, transportation in general, because I think there might be some interesting things you've learned from that experience.
Yeah, definitely. I think there was the allure of Silicon Valley as a place to learn about entrepreneurship, learn about startups, and that's what I went for as well. And I had been living in China before then. I actually lived in China for about 2.5 years total. And two of my big takeaways from being in China were that I wanted to continue doing environmentally focused work, and that's part of what brought me to China. A few of the times that I lived there. And the second was that, I'd already seen the micromobility revolution happening on the streets of Shanghai, Taipei, Beijing in the early 2010s, and was really convinced that, these types of light electric vehicles, two-wheelers, are a much more sustainable way for people to get around in big cities. So I went to Silicon Valley, lived in San Francisco, and started hearing about this company called Scoot. And I started seeing their red Vespa style electric mopeds on the streets, and started hearing that my friends were using them too. So, I actually just, reached out to their CTO, got an interview, and began as one of the first engineers there. And, back then we were still, I mean, talk about technological innovation. We were still using mopeds with lead acid batteries. We were still using 2G network, IoT modules. So writing software for that, is a bit more complicated than what we have now with, all the IoT modules that, we've been able to develop in the past decade or so. And I think, some of my big takeaways from Scoot were that, we did start with those electric mopeds, but moved into other form factors and really saw all of the different applications for those different form factors. And, we didn't just have one model of electric moped either. We had, like a cargo version, and then a, version that was much faster that we actually could deploy in Spain. I spent about 4 months helping launch Spain and saw the different applications there for vehicles that could go on the highway, which is definitely not what we could do in San Francisco. But yeah, it was just incredible to see, all these different applications for micromobility, especially in the way that it can be multimodal and not just like a single type of scooter.
One thing that really stood out to me in hearing both of your stories is the allure of Silicon Valley, but also the allure of Silicon Valley with context of another region. One of my main inspirations is a book called The Power Law, and it talks about the history of venture capital in the US, but there's actually a part of it that talks about its growth, actually first to China, but then going into Europe and India, and now looking at the regions of LATAM and Africa as places that have yet to really capitalize or mature in the same way. In that, one of the main things that I think about is how do you take lessons, just like it's talked about in the book, how do you take lessons from the US, maybe the maturity of the venture capital market here, and apply it to other regions? And I actually feel like that's not an easy exercise. And the founders like yourself who are on the ground trying to replicate those lessons are firsthand figuring that out in terms of what are the actual important things here, because otherwise there's a lot of noise, right? They're not the same geographies, not the same societal tendencies, cultural connections. Not everything's the same. So one thing I'd love to ask you, Charlie, in comparing the regions between, your lessons from China, applying it to here domestically, how did you take those lessons and apply it to this context?
Yeah, great question, Somil. In terms of our business model, I think, yeah, the affordability is a big piece there. And coming from China, where a lot of these micromobility devices are widely available, and I think you see this in the car market too. Like, in China, there's a proliferation of affordable EVs. And that's been the case for micromobility devices too, where it's been very accessible to people. And now, I haven't been back in a few years, but, my friends who've been recently come back and tell me the streets are silent. And that's because everyone's driving EVs, electric mopeds, electric scooters, electric bikes. And that's incredible. And I think here, we're still stuck on these enormous SUVs that cost, I don't know, like a year's pay for someone. And, I think in the micromobility space too, that's been really advantageous for them in terms of adoption. And here, for us, it's like really making these vehicles more accessible. And I think back to the choice too, like when I was in China, there are already thousands of different form factors that fit different use cases and different body types. Whereas here we've been, maybe a little slower in terms of that kind of Cambrian explosion of form factors, and we're kind of seeing it now. But China's had that for a while, allowing people from all walks of life to really embrace these vehicles. And I think that's what sort of translates now into the power of choice on our platforms. We really want to have a vehicle for everyone, and then making it affordable, because it's still something that that price tag still intimidates people. And I think we've seen this with some of the well-intentioned rebate programs in the US where, you give someone $1,000 and they can go get an e-bike. And what ends up happening is they'll buy, the lowest price e-bike, which will be fully covered, which is great. But that e-bike is not going to last super long. Maybe they're going to have a bad experience with it. So what we try to do is get people on these really high quality e-bikes from really good manufacturers and help people really fall in love with these vehicles, because they can be amazing and they can be such an integral part of your life if you can embrace it. And I think, also touching on the service piece, I think, through subscription, we can really make it easy for people to own these vehicles. So, back when we were doing retail, it was definitely a challenge to, help people really make that transition away from their car, because, cars, there are all these different places you can go get oil and, parts, and there are tons of, catalogs online for all these things, shops. When you get like a direct to consumer e-bike, you get it at home in a box, you assemble it. Maybe you're not like 100% sure how to assemble it, how tight to, tighten that bolt. So that's why we do all the, in-house assembly, make sure that bike's ready to go. And then all the servicing too, like we experienced when, we were doing some drop shipping. Someone might take their vehicle to a local bike shop, and the bike shop's like, well, we've never seen this, motor configuration before, or this manufacturer. So, we're able to provide that really good service that enables people to, have sort of a worry-free relationship with this vehicle and a long-term relationship with the vehicle.
I mean, I wish we could dive into all of that, but the one thing that really stood out to me was I can only imagine waking up one day in New York City and the streets are silent. And I just can't fathom it, really. But I think maybe that shows just how far, the geographies that you were looking at have really come. And I guess that's the goal, right? And it's cool to see that it happened somewhere. So that's amazing. I know in the interest of time, there's so many things you talked about, the servicing component. I feel like you could run a whole nother podcast episode on that. Servicing is like a decision that you have to make. Do you do it in-house? Do you manufacture? Do you outsource? I mean, there's so many different dynamics there. But one of the cool things that I think are needed to be talked about is your fundraising history. You not only have a very cool fundraising history, but I think you have a very, very clear view on how you need to sell this problem and your company and how your technology fits in it. So I'd just love to hear from you. Tell us about your fundraising journey thus far. You've raised for some really storied climate specific investors, as well as some strategics. So what has that experience been like? And what do you think has worked for you attracting these investors?
A great question, Samuel. I think we are very grateful for some amazing folks who have invested in us. So that includes Blackhorn Ventures, Yamaha Motor Ventures, Porsche, Proeza Ventures, some amazing angel group as well, Lorimer Ventures, etc. So, and I think like for us, it has been quite a journey, right? I think I wish I could tell you that, hey, it took us 2 weeks and we had a round done and off we go. And it was lots of conversations. I would say hundreds of conversations, if not more. And I think it was an evolution for us around. It became initially a numbers game where we were like, hey, but also a game around pattern matching, right? Over time, we realized that people were struggling with X question or Y question. And also lots of feedback, right? I think the cool thing about even the no's are no that comes with feedback is incredibly helpful for us to iterate, think about, ponder, and even explore a different business model. Given the what we want, I think where we are aligned with the venture capital world is that we want outside impact, so that they want outside impact. A lot of them, for them, is financial. In certain cases, with the impact funds, is also the impact metrics, which of course we love. And I think for us is also like, okay, like what are they looking at? How are they viewing us? Where are they struggling with? What can we address better? And then where can we meet them? And where is not a fit, or where it is a fit, right? Can we romanticize a similar future? Can they be helpful and valuable to us in our business? Are they excited about what we're doing? Are they okay with some of the, we are not a pure SaaS tech platform. Like, we are doing the hard work. We are doing fixing, our team is fixing bikes and running test ride events and all of those things. So I think we have been able to embrace both the tech part but also operations and service part. So I think it's also about finding the right fit. But it's been a quite a fruitful journey, I think, with a lot of feedback. And I think so that has, of course, tweaked our ability to be more strategic and thoughtful about how we think about our business, how we think about key strategic decisions, given the fundraising process gives you, in a very short time, a lot of, as we call in Ridepanda words, chew the bamboo.
Very cool. And as we wrap up the episode, one of the coolest things that I get the opportunity to do is ask you, speaking for my own interest, what are the 3 pieces of advice that you'd give to founders looking to do something of their own?
Yeah, there are a couple of them, right? So I think one thing that this is advice for me that hopefully translates to others, is to less be outcome minded, but more about appreciating the journey, right? And it's easier said than done, because there are always fires, there's always chaos, there's always something going wrong and something not working in your favor. But ability to take a step back and say, this is what I wanted to do. It's a meaningful mission. We have achieved so many different things, and these are the challenges that I'm getting to play with and figure out what's best for the business and the company. I may make some mistakes, but being kind, and but also being able to learn from them and move on. So I think that's the like one of the big pieces that I always tell me, that I think is hopefully helpful to others as well. The other thing, I think we pivoted the business quite a while, right? So I think we went into a couple of the things, but what did not change for us at all is our focus on the mission, right? So that's a second suggestion or advice we would have, is like focusing on the mission, and the business model or will follow, right? If this was the other way around, we would have been really struggling. If we were tied to a model or a way or approach, we were like, this is the mission, this is what we're here to do, and we'll find a way that does it, and then that leads to accelerates that behavior in some ways. And then finally, I think it's a game of persistence, right? I think it's like there's lots of ups and downs, but I think it's all about when you're almost giving up, you've already given up, right? So I think that's like those ethos, I think, do really matter, right? Because there's some days where we could not tell you 3 years ago if we will be doing this, right? Who would have known? But I think it's more about like figuring it out, testing it out, and being able to also go back to enjoy the journey.
Totally. And I feel like I can see each one of those, how much you've appreciated going throughout the journey of micromobility and kind of fighting the stigmatism, focusing specifically on what works and not being attached. Actually, one of my favorite podcast interviews, very great founders and entrepreneurs. And Mr. Beast from YouTube is, of course, a very current rise in our generation. And one of his best quotes was that he didn't care what worked, it just needed to work. And so having that lack of ego with this problem, I think with the amount of experimentation and data analysis you do, I mean, it's clear that that's the focus. And of course, the game of persistence, you've been at it multiple times, can definitely see all of that coming through. So as you can probably tell, or hopefully tell from me, I love this episode. I feel like I wish we could have gone on for hours, but I really appreciate both of you taking the time for this. Before we sign out, Charlie and Chinmay respectively, where can the audience find you?
I mean, great question. You can always come to Ridepanda if you want your employer to offer this service to you, but we are on LinkedIn, so feel free to reach out there.
Yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you guys so much.